increase your worth, or risk being replaced. This isn't a threat. It's simply how things often work. I used to think that sentiment was overly dramatic. Then, I started noticing how quietly individuals disappear from systems they believed were loyal to them. Back in 2008, the financial crisis led to thousands of job losses at Lehman Brothers within days. Many of these people had worked there for over a decade, putting in long hours, making sacrifices, and showing loyalty. None of that changed the decision. In 2020, during the pandemic, big companies like Airbnb and Uber laid off a lot of their staff through video calls. Some found out they were no longer needed by getting automated emails. No scandal, no betrayal, just a cold calculation. Job turnover data is pretty consistent. In the US, the average worker stays at a job for about 4 years. In tech, it's often even less. Even good workers get replaced if their cost outweighs their value. The wording is always nice: restructuring, strategic realignment, etc. But underneath those words is a colder idea: utility. The usual explanation is efficiency, market forces, and responsibility to shareholders. Those things are real, but they don't tell the whole story. What people rarely say openly is that emotional investment doesn't show up on a company's financial statements. That same pattern shows up outside of corporations. In romantic relationships, people often strongly believe in unconditional loyalty. Studies on why relationships end show that thinking you have better options is a good predictor of breakups. When people think they can do better, they become less committed. That was shown in research done by Harold Kelly and John Thibault decades ago. Feeling happy in the relationship matters, and so do the things you've put into it. But having other options quietly affects things, like a hidden negotiation. I've seen this happen in person. A partner starts making more money, gaining status, or expanding their social circle. Their attitude changes a little, not cruel at first, just less dependent and less eager to please. The other partner senses it before anything is said. You can feel the tension. The balance has changed. We're taught to believe in teamwork, friendship, and company culture. Those things are real on an emotional level, but they're only real under certain conditions. Social psychologist Elliot Aronson talked about how a group's bond gets stronger when its members are valuable contributors. But when someone's contribution drops, the bond weakens. It feels personal, but it usually isn't. I remember reading about a manager at a European factory who unknowingly trained his replacement. He'd been told the company was growing. Months later, his job was gone. The younger employee he trained was okay with a lower salary and had newer skills. The company didn't hate the manager. They made a change that made financial sense. This doesn't usually happen loudly. Instead, it's quiet. Attention slowly shifts away. Fewer meeting invites, slower responses, and less access to information. Then, the conversation happens. It's not about you. In some ways, that's the most truthful thing they could say. It was never about you. It was about what someone could offer. This is where the comforting lie comes in. They need me. Psychologists call it thinking you're the center of everything. We overestimate how much we uniquely contribute. In group experiments, people usually think their own input is above average. In one study about group tasks, people believed they did more than half the work, even when it was clear they were splitting the work evenly. We confuse effort with being irreplaceable. Years of service make this illusion stronger. I've been here since the start, someone might say, but systems don't reward how long you've been around. They reward what you can offer now. Talk to someone who went through a company merger. Being there a long time won't save you if your job can be done by someone else. Machiavelli understood something we still struggle with. In The Prince, he wrote that people are ungrateful, inconsistent, pretending, deceitful, and focused on avoiding danger and seeking personal gain. That sounds cynical until you think about how organizations act. Gratitude fades when things get tough. The desire to gain something new changes where loyalty lies. It's not just people in charge who act this way. Subordinates do it too. I've talked to workers who stayed quiet about unethical decisions because they were afraid of being replaced. I've seen partners put up with disrespect because they thought they didn't have other options. The possibility of being replaced isn't just a risk from the outside. It limits you from the inside. You see examples of this everywhere. Influencers get replaced when their audience drops. Athletes get traded after a bad season. Politicians get abandoned when their poll numbers fall. It's always framed as change, progress, or strategy, not as getting rid of something. But for the person being replaced, it feels the same: shock, betrayal, confusion. I'm fascinated by how predictable this is and how often we ignore it. In systems theory, stability relies on being able to adapt. Parts that can be replaced make systems strong. From a purely structural point of view, people who can't be replaced are a problem. They create dependence, which takes power away from the system. Here's something people rarely say out loud. Systems want you to be useful, not indispensable. If you're too important, you threaten their control. Most people go through life, whether at work, in relationships, or in social circles, assuming that loyalty builds up like interest in a bank account and that years of dedication turn into immunity. I used to believe that, but I don't anymore. Every time there's a restructuring, every time someone gets pushed out of friendship group, and every time a partner pulls away after finding better options, the same thing happens. Your value matters more than your emotional connection. If this is so obvious in layoffs, in divorce rates, in job turnover, and in the small shifts in everyday relationships, why do so many people act as if they can't be replaced? Why do smart adults keep acting as if they're protected by something invisible? The easiest answer is they need me. It sounds reasonable, and it feels safe, but it's often wrong. Psychologists have been studying this bias for decades. In the 1970s, researchers studying group performance noticed a pattern that we now call thinking you're the center of everything. When people were asked to estimate how much they contributed to a group task, the total was usually over 100%. Everyone thought they did more than their fair share. In one study with married couples, each partner said they did more of the housework than the other person thought. They couldn't both be right, but they both felt sure they were. I didn't expect this bias to be so strong, even among successful people. In companies, I've seen teams finish big projects and then privately rate how much each person contributed. The person who sent the most emails, went to the most meetings, and slept the least always thought they were indispensable. But when senior managers looked at the same project, they had different criteria: who made money, who lowered risk, and who had unique skills. Effort was emotional. Value was strategic. This is where the theory starts to break down. Management books often praise engagement, commitment, and taking initiative, and those traits do correlate with performance. But they don't automatically make you important. You can be engaged and still easy to replace. Think about middle managers during the big restructurings in the early 2000s. Companies like General Electric got rid of many longtime managers despite their good performance reviews. Internal reports talked about role redundancy and skill overlap, meaning their jobs could be done by others. Years of service didn't make them scarce. Years create familiarity. Scarcity creates power. The illusion of being central gets stronger over time. The longer you're in a role, the more connections you make and the more you get into routines. You start to confuse having a lot of connections with being irreplaceable. I felt this myself on smaller projects. When everyone asks for your input, your schedule is full, and you're copied on every message. It feels like you're the center of everything. But sometimes The system is just using you as a channel, not a foundation. In 2014, a senior engineer at a big European telecom company had been there for over 15 years. He knew the old systems better than anyone, and his colleagues said he was critical. But when the company switched to cloud computing, his knowledge became less unique. Within a year, he was offered a severance package. According to anonymous internal interviews, he was shocked. "They can't function without me," he reportedly said. But they could. They reorganized around different skills. Here's something that's rarely said. Systems don't care about loyalty, hours worked, or emotional investment. They care about what value you bring and how hard it would be to find someone else to do what you do. If 10 other people can do 80% of your job after a little training, how important you feel is irrelevant. Even more unsettling is how being busy hides whether you're replaceable. Studies show that visible activity often gets social recognition. Sending emails at midnight signals dedication. Being in meetings all the time signals involvement. Yet studies also suggest that people who make a big impact often do fewer things but make them count more. It's easier to reward a lot of visible effort socially. It's harder to see if someone has a rare skill until it's needed. I've seen employees try to defend their job security by talking about their sacrifices. "I stayed late for years. I trained half the team. I never took a long vacation." These things sound good, and they imply you're owed something. But systems aren't about morality. They're about cost and benefit. Machiavelli wrote that a leader should rely on what they control, not on the goodwill of others. If you replace leader with organization, the logic becomes clearer. An organization doesn't care about your past sacrifices. It cares about whether losing you would cause problems. If it wouldn't, those feelings disappear quickly. Here, the comforting lie does its job. Believing they need me lowers anxiety. It lets people put up with long hours, slow promotions, and subtle disrespect. It turns vulnerability into a false sense of security. I understand why people hold on to it. But there's another distortion underneath. We confuse being indispensable with being liked. Popular employees often think their social connections will protect them, and sometimes they do, for a while. But when finances get tight, being liked is less important than being useful. During economic downturns, companies publicly talk about team culture while secretly figuring out payroll costs. I've seen employees who were universally liked and who held their teams together emotionally get quietly let go because their jobs didn't generate measurable income. The team was sad, but the organization adjusted and the numbers went back to normal. This is where the psychological defense starts to fall apart. If effort isn't value, if loyalty isn't leverage, and if years of service aren't insurance, then what's being measured? Not how hard you work, not how much you care, but how much it would cost to lose you and how hard it would be to find someone else to do what you do. That realization is unsettling because it takes away the comforting idea that things are fair. It suggests that security isn't earned through hard work, but through being strategic. It implies that being needed isn't something others tell you, but something you create. Once you start thinking that way, another question comes up that's even more dangerous. If value isn't effort, then what is it exactly? The answer is uncomfortable because it takes morality out of the equation. Value isn't about being good. It's not about being loyal, ethical, agreeable, or hardworking. Value, in systems of power, is what you can offer. Machiavelli wrote that people are controlled either by fear or by what they gain. The sentence sounds dramatic until you see how institutions act under pressure. Fear creates consequences. Gain creates dependence. Both create what you can offer. Morality by itself doesn't. In 2010, when the United Kingdom replaced its Prime Minister Gordon Brown with David Cameron, the language was about ideology, vision, and renewal. But what really happened was simpler. Brown had lost his power to win elections, keep his party together, and maintain trust. Political parties don't remove leaders because they're immoral. They remove them when their presence no longer helps them win. The same thing happens with corporate leadership. In 2012, when Marissa Mayer became CEO of Yahoo, she was celebrated as a visionary from Google. For a while, her presence made investors more confident and stock prices went up. Her personal brand gave her an advantage. But when performance didn't improve and the company's direction faltered, support faded. The moral narrative didn't change much, but what she could offer did. I remember being struck by a case at a multinational consulting firm. A senior partner was known for his integrity, fairness, and mentorship. Everyone respected him, but he didn't bring in new clients. Meanwhile, another partner, who was more abrasive and politically skilled, generated a lot of revenue. When restructuring discussions started, the decision was quiet and clear. The respected partner left, and the revenue generator stayed. Here, theory turns into simple math. Behavioral economics gives a straightforward way to look at this. In negotiation research, scholars like Roger Fisher and William Ury talked about BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Your power in any negotiation comes not from being virtuous, but from your other options. If you can walk away without losing much, you have leverage. If you can't, you give in. Value, then, is being able to create consequences through having choices. This changes everything. A person is valuable when replacing them is costly. When their leaving reduces income, destabilizes a team, hurts reputation, or slows things down. A person is valuable when their skills are rare enough that finding a replacement takes a lot of time, money, or risk. In labor economics, higher wages often go to people with rare skills, not those with moral merit. Surgeons who do rare procedures earn more than general practitioners who work just as hard. Cybersecurity experts with niche skills command high salaries when there's a high threat. The market consistently shows that scarcity increases leverage. I've seen this happen in quieter ways too. At one technology startup, a mid-level developer became the only person who fully understood a key algorithm. It wasn't on purpose. He just worked on it from the beginning. Over time, his bargaining position changed. He negotiated to work remotely, have flexible hours, and get paid more, not because he was nicer or worked longer, but because his leaving would have caused serious problems. His presence made the system stronger. His absence would weaken it. That's what you can offer. Contrast that with the moral employee who's always on time, cooperative, and agreeable, but whose skills are common. They might be appreciated and get good performance reviews, but when things get tough, that appreciation won't protect them. This is where the conflict gets sharper. We're taught to believe that being morally good should lead to job security, that fairness will be returned, and that loyalty creates an invisible shield. Management books often reinforce this with talk about culture and shared values. And in stable times, these ideas feel true. But when things get difficult, systems go back to a what can you offer mindset. Machiavelli's point wasn't that cruelty is good. It was that power follows different rules than morality. A leader who only relies on being loved risks falling apart when love fades. A leader who structures their position so that betraying them is costly maintains control. Replace leader with employee, partner, consultant, or political actor, and the same logic applies. I once talked to a woman who'd been in a long-term relationship for over a decade. She said she was supportive, patient, and always accommodating. Where her partner started making more money and expanding his social circle, things changed. She felt it before she understood it. Arguments became unfair. Her fear of losing the relationship grew, and his fear lessened. The leverage shifted. She was still moral and kind, but kindness didn't hold things together. Having other options did. Here's something people rarely say. Value is being able to shape outcomes, create consequences, and offer something that can't be easily copied. It's structural, not sentimental. A person is hard to replace when their skills are rare, their network is unique, and their leaving would cause a lot of problems. A person creates costs when clients leave with them, when knowledge disappears, and when public perception changes. A person makes a system stronger when their skills increase collective output beyond what others can do. Goodness is admirable, but goodness without what you can offer is fragile. Here's where I hesitate because this logic feels cold. It seems to reward being calculating over being sincere. It seems to suggest that empathy is less important than positioning. I didn't expect reality to align with that so often. Yet another contradiction appears. If what you can offer is the true value, if scarcity and alternatives create power, why do so many people give up what they can offer? Why do they tie themselves to single employers, single income streams, and single emotional dependencies? If what you can offer is power, why do most people give it up so willingly? Part of the answer is uncomfortable, because the systems around them are designed to make giving up what you can offer feel safe. Systems don't need people who can't be replaced. Those people are unpredictable. They negotiate, resist, and create friction. Systems need continuity, scalability, and control. For that, people who can be replaced are much more convenient. Look at corporate structures. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, management theory was all about streamlining. Six Sigma, lean management, standardized workflows. The official goal was efficiency, and it worked. Error rates dropped, and output increased. But another effect quietly emerged. Jobs became modular. Tasks were documented, broken down, and transferable. Knowledge that used to be held by individuals was put into procedures. I sat on a consulting project where the goal was risk mitigation. What that really meant was making sure that no single employee had critical knowledge without it being written down. When I asked why, the answer was about resilience. But underneath that language was something strategic. Depending on someone reduces control. If one person becomes indispensable, they gain bargaining power. Standardization isn't neutral, it's political. Education follows a similar pattern. Modern schooling systems have been built around uniformity. Fixed curricula, age-based cohorts, standardized testing. The sociologist Michel Foucault talked about how institutions shape people through routines and surveillance. That sounds dramatic, but think about the effect. Students are rewarded for being compliant, on time, and repeating accepted answers, not for creating alternatives. When I first noticed this, I thought it was just about fairness, equal opportunity, and measurable benchmarks. But there's a more strategic explanation. Standardized skills are easier to certify, compare, and replace. Then there's the gig economy. Platforms like Uber, Deliveroo, and TaskRabbit talk about flexibility and independence. But their algorithms allocate tasks, set prices, and rank performance through systems that aren't transparent. Drivers and couriers are technically independent contractors, but their income depends on ratings and dynamic pricing models they don't control. In 2020, investigative reports showed how small changes in algorithmic incentives significantly change driver behavior. This isn't accidental. Algorithms reward predictable behavior. High ratings depend on politeness, speed, and following protocols. Deviations are punished. The worker is interchangeable as long as they meet performance thresholds. Replaceable doesn't mean incompetent. It means structurally swappable. Corporate loyalty programs operate in a similar way. Employees are encouraged to identify with company values, mission statements, and internal culture. I once reviewed onboarding materials for a multinational firm where the word family appeared many times in a single presentation. The emotional appeal was clear: belonging, security, and shared purpose. But families don't conduct quarterly layoffs based on revenue forecasts. Here's something that's rarely said: uniqueness is replaced by loyalty. Instead of developing rare skills or independent leverage, people are rewarded for aligning, for being team players, and for not challenging decisions publicly. Research shows that employees often keep dissenting opinions to themselves because they're afraid of social or professional consequences. Avoiding conflict becomes the norm. I've seen competent employees gradually limit their own range. They avoid controversial projects, decline opportunities outside the company, and suppress alternative income streams because management subtly discourages distractions. Each decision seems reasonable, but together they reduce autonomy. The mechanism is subtle. No one explicitly says, "Stay replaceable." Instead, incentives are structured around convenience. Promotions favor those who don't disrupt the hierarchy. Performance evaluations emphasize cultural fit. The person who questions the strategy is labeled difficult, while the one who complies is labeled reliable. In behavioral terms, reinforcement shapes conformity. In strategic terms, conformity preserves control. Even in social relationships, similar patterns appear. A partner who becomes too independent, too socially connected, or too economically autonomous can make the other partner anxious. They might ask for more reassurance or subtly discourage external ambitions. Why do you need that? Isn't what we have enough? On the surface, it's about intimacy, but underneath, it's about reducing uncertainty. Systems, whether corporations, platforms, or relationships, prefer predictability over autonomy. Predictability allows planning, while autonomy introduces negotiation. Machiavelli would recognize this instantly. A ruler who allows subjects to gain independent power risks rebellion. A ruler who fragments power maintains dominance. Modern institutions don't operate like Renaissance principalities, but the logic of control remains recognizable. Here's where I hesitate again. Not all standardization is bad, and not all loyalty is manipulative. Organizations genuinely need coordination. Education requires structure, and platforms must manage scale. The usual explanation of efficiency, fairness, and order isn't entirely false, but it doesn't tell the whole story. In the intricate dance of organizational dynamics, a subtle strategy often operates: the devaluation of individuals to render them easily replaceable. This tactic, seemingly innocuous on the surface, carries profound implications for power dynamics and individual autonomy. Replaceable individuals, facing limited options and diminished bargaining power, find themselves in a position of vulnerability, subject to the whims of the system. What is perhaps most unsettling is the degree to which individuals unwittingly participate in this process. They internalize the unspoken rules, self-censor their thoughts and actions, and trade their autonomy for the perceived stability of conformity. Convenience becomes a seductive alternative to the inherent risks associated with scarcity. Scarcity, in this context, demands a willingness to step outside the established norms, to cultivate unique skills, and to forge independent networks. This raises a compelling question. What transpires when an individual deliberately resists this pressure to conform? When they actively cultivate rare skills, nurture independent networks, and explore alternative options, how does the system react? In essence, what happens when an individual transforms from an easily managed unit into a valuable asset capable of exerting leverage? The system, often acting with subtle yet relentless force, subjects the individual to a series of tests. It probes their resolve, assesses their influence, and gauges the extent of their commitment to their newfound independence. It then resists their efforts, sometimes overtly, sometimes covertly, seeking to maintain the established order. And in some instances, it resorts to punishment, aiming to deter others from following a similar path. This phenomenon finds a parallel in the crab in the bucket analogy. When a group of crabs are confined to a bucket, any crab attempting to escape is dragged back down by its peers. Social psychology mirrors this dynamic in human groups, where individuals who begin to outperform their peers often face subtle forms of social exclusion. They may be interrupted more frequently, their ideas scrutinized more harshly, and their mistakes remembered for longer. Personal experience underscores the swiftness with which warmth can dissipate when an individual's value rises. In a technology firm, an analyst who developed a tool that improved reporting accuracy experienced this firsthand. As senior leaders began to seek his input directly, his visibility increased, but so did the tension with his peers. Colleagues ceased sharing informal updates, and inside jokes no longer included him. His suggestions were met with silence, followed by others repeating his ideas later. Group dynamics research, particularly the work of Kipling-Williams on ostracism, reveals the sensitivity of humans to shifts in status. Even minor exclusions trigger neural pain responses, highlighting the deep-seated need for belonging and acceptance. When an individual's increasing competence threatens the established hierarchy, it creates instability. Others experience this not as inspiration, but as a direct threat to their own position. The conventional justification for this resistance is envy. While envy may play a role, it is merely the surface manifestation of a deeper recalculation of leverage. When a colleague becomes more valuable, one's relative bargaining power diminishes. Promotions, recognition, and influence. These are limited resources, and one person's ascent can feel like another's constraint. Corporate case studies of career sabotage reveal patterns of subtle, yet damaging actions. A supervisor might withhold key information from a promising subordinate, or a recommendation letter might be written with lukewarm language. Critical project assignments may be quietly redirected, each act defensible in isolation, but collectively slowing momentum. In one instance, a finance professional who obtained an advanced certification and expanded her client base anticipated greater autonomy. Instead, her manager began micromanaging her decisions, stifling her initiatives under the guise of aligning with team priorities. Her increased competence and leverage were met with containment. This is where the narrative becomes morally ambiguous. While growth is often lauded and excellence supposedly rewarded, status incongruity research suggests that individuals who rise too quickly can trigger a backlash, particularly if their ascent disrupts established hierarchies. In experiments, competent high achievers were evaluated less favorably when their success implied a shift in power dynamics. Loyalty often erodes when the balance of power shifts. Friendships can cool when one person's income increases dramatically. The wealthier friend may gravitate toward different environments and networks, leading to fewer invitations and subtly competitive conversations. The explanation often provided is that we grew apart, but the underlying shift in leverage is often a contributing factor. In intimate relationships, this shift can be even more pronounced. A partner who achieves financial independence, expands their social network, or becomes emotionally less dependent may encounter unexpected friction. The other partner may not consciously calculate leverage, but their behavior can change, manifesting as increased jealousy, criticism framed as concern, or subtle reminders of shared history intended to reinforce dependence. In essence, one is cherished as long as they remain comfortable and aligned. However, once their independence creates asymmetry, affection can transform into resistance. This is a morally gray zone of human interaction. Is the group wrong to protect stability, or is the partner wrong to fear imbalance? From their perspectives, rising individuals introduce uncertainty, which can be inherently destabilizing. Machiavelli observed that power shifts inevitably provoke countermoves. A prince who expands influence too rapidly risks inciting a coalition against him. This logic extends to microstructures, where increased leverage alters the distribution of power. Those who feel diminished may react, whether subtly, defensively, or strategically. While conventional wisdom encourages ignoring the negativity and focusing on growth, the resistance is often systemic, not personal. It is not about one's personality, but about recalibrating control. Individuals tend to respond in two predictable ways. Some retreat, downplaying their competence, softening their visibility, and reassuring others, trading potential leverage for restored harmony. Others escalate, growing sharper, more guarded, and less trusting, interpreting every interaction as a competition. Both reactions extract a cost. The former preserves belonging while sacrificing power, while the latter preserves power but erodes of those around you. If increasing one's value disrupts equilibrium, if growth invites containment, and if affection fades when leverage shifts, then rising is not purely rewarded. It is contested. This raises the question: if growth provokes resistance from colleagues, institutions, or partners, is becoming stronger worth the friction it creates? Or is comfort the safer strategy? Or, more brutally, is it safer to be liked or difficult to replace? Machiavelli argued that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. This assertion, initially seeming extreme, becomes increasingly relevant when observing institutions under pressure. Love is unstable because it relies on perception, which can fluctuate with emotions, narratives, and rumors. Fear, structured correctly, depends on consequences, which are measurable and predictable. Consider the fate of political leaders who relied primarily on affection. Julius Caesar, despite his popularity among the masses, was assassinated when elite interests felt threatened. His power lacked controlled fear among those capable of removing him. Augustus, his successor, learned from this failure, consolidating authority, restructuring military loyalty, and ensuring understanding of the consequences of defection. His reign lasted for decades. The difference was not charisma, but calculation. This pattern repeats in corporate leadership. A chief executive who seeks universal approval often dilutes difficult decisions, postponing layoffs, retaining underperformers, and steering strategy toward consensus-driven paralysis. While employees may like such a leader, markets do not reward likability, and boards do not protect it when numbers decline. One technology CEO in the early 2000s, widely regarded as empathetic and approachable, experienced this firsthand. Despite high morale reflected in internal surveys, the board replaced him within months when quarterly losses accumulated. His relational capital evaporated under financial pressure, proving that love is indeed conditional. In contrast, leaders who cultivate controlled fear, not terror, but clarity about consequences, often fare better. When and Mulcahy took over Xerox during a financial crisis in 2001, she implemented severe restructuring, cutting jobs, and selling divisions. While not universally liked, she enforced standards and prioritized performance. The company survived, and respect followed her demonstration of resolve. Behavioral psychology supports this observation. Research on authority demonstrates that predictable consequences shape behavior more reliably than fluctuating approval. Incentives and penalties that are clear are more effective than affection. This dynamic is also evident at lower levels. A manager who avoids confrontation to remain liked gradually loses influence. Deadlines slip, accountability erodes, and the team senses the absence of enforcement. Meanwhile, a manager who calmly but consistently applies consequences may generate discomfort but retains control. This intensifies the internal conflict. No one desires hatred, as social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The of being disliked is not abstract, it is hardwired into our biology. However, the of being replaceable carries its own cost. When perceived as soft, endlessly accommodating, and unwilling to impose boundaries, one's leverage declines, others test limits, and they expand into undefended spaces. Machiavelli did not advocate cruelty, warning against being despised, as hatred is destabilizing. However, controlled fear, the understanding that lines cannot be crossed without consequence, stabilizes power and signals strength. Paradoxically, strength often generates respect, which is not identical to affection. It emerges when others perceive capacity, the ability to act, enforce, and endure. In negotiation studies, participants consistently concede more to counterparts who demonstrate credible alternatives and firm boundaries, not because they are loved, but because their leverage is evident. In a partnership dispute, one founder prioritizing harmony constantly compromised, the other quietly secured external investors, diversified revenue streams, and built independent advisory relationships. When conflict intensified, the second founder's position was unassailable. The lesson is ruthless. Love can evaporate when incentives shift. Fear anchored in clear consequence is more stable, and respect follows visible strength, measured by leverage. This raises the question of personal ethics. At what point does strategic boundary setting become manipulation? When does deterrence become intimidation? Machiavelli might argue that survival justifies calculation, but survival of what? Position? Reputation? Self? If the logic of power rewards those who impose consequences, what does that do to the person who adopts it? As one begins to increase their value, cultivate scarcity, and build alternatives, perception subtly shifts. Thinking begins in contingencies, leverage, and exit options. Initially, it feels like maturity, but eventually it can feel like distance. Power repeatedly demonstrates that status alters cognition. Experiments show that individuals in positions of authority become more action-oriented, focused on rewards, and less attentive to social constraints. Furthermore, power reduces empathic accuracy, making individuals less accurate in reading others' emotions. Strategic thinking requires abstraction, evaluating relationships in terms of outcomes, stripping away texture, and increasing efficiency. If leverage demands alternatives and alternatives require detachment, then cultivating power may erode empathy. There are documented cases where individuals exploited earlier in their careers later reproduced similar dynamics upon gaining authority, often to the point of rationalizing harsh methods with the words, "I had to endure it. It made me stronger." In this way, systems perpetuate themselves. An executive, abruptly laid off in his early 30s, later led a restructuring that eliminated hundreds of roles, responding to questions of the emotional toll with a calm, "It's business." They'll adapt. Power does not always corrupt through dramatic means. It often shifts internal narratives, rationalizing hardness as clarity, distance as professionalism, and emotional detachment as strength. Experiments show that individuals primed with power are more likely to objectify others, describing them in instrumental terms, treating them as means to an end. When focused on leverage long enough, people begin to resemble variables. It is easy to be caught up in evaluating whether a link increases optionality or whether a relationship is strategically efficient, but it also feels callous. The moral trap. To avoid being controlled, one learns to control. To avoid being replaceable, one makes others replaceable. To avoid exploitation, one preemptively calculates advantage. Machiavelli would call this maturity, this abandonment of naive idealism. But there is a cost rarely calculated. When others are treated as resources, they eventually sense it. Trust becomes transactional and loyalty conditional. One begins to inhabit the very logic once criticized. However, the refusal of strategic awareness leaves one vulnerable. Empathetic individuals are frequently undermined for refusing to think in terms of leverage, prioritizing harmony over boundaries, and being admired, then dismissed. The dilemma is structural. Increase your value, risking the loss of softness, or preserve your softness, risking the loss of position. Transformation can be gradual, consisting of small calculations, a withheld favor, a strategic silence, or a relationship maintained for utility, justified as growth. One day the world looks different, less personal, more negotiable. The question is not whether power changes people. It does. The question is whether it is possible to increase leverage, reduce replaceability, without blending in entirely with the system once feared. Is there a structure of strength lacking moral erosion? Is it merely a comforting illusion? Certain individuals manage to increase their leverage without turning predatory. Non-replacement is not a personality trait. It is an architecture with scarcity, autonomy, and consequence. Scarcity, often misunderstood, is about being difficult to substitute, requiring rare skill combinations. A software engineer who understands regulatory compliance in a controlled industry is rarer. A surgeon who can perform specialized procedures with low complication rates becomes critical. A product leader who combines technical fluency with the ability to translate engineering constraints into investor language becomes central during funding negotiations because her skill intersection is uncommon. Her removal would fracture communication between critical layers of the company. Scarcity requires deliberately built skills that are not easily replicated. Autonomy, rooted in negotiation research, requires credible alternatives to negotiate from strength. Employees who maintain external networks and job prospects negotiate greater compensation and more flexible terms. Autonomy is not defiance, it is optionality. Two employees request flexibility. One has no external offers, income, or alternatives. The other consults, maintains relationships, and has been approached by competitors. Management's response differs because the second employee's request carries implicit consequence. Departure is plausible and departure is costly. Power, mistaken for aggression, is the ability to leave. Consequence is not cruelty. Instead, predictable consequences shape behavior more effectively than erratic punishment. If the absence creates measurable disruption, then the presence matters. A consultant's resignation, followed by 3 clients, prompted policy shifts because his exit created consequence. Contrasting this, when all is put into an institution, there is no credible alternative and the leverage collapses. In this model, replaceability does not require it. It requires design. Scarcity through skill composition, autonomy through diversified options, consequence through value that travels. Strong players avoid overexposure, decline select opportunities, and do not reveal desperation because bridges are alternative routes. Calm, resulting from optionality, is common. In relationships, partners with financial independence, personal networks, and emotional regulation need not leave because it is implied. Dependence breeds anxiety. Autonomy reduces coercion. The ability to leave often strengthens commitment. Control over the system begins with self-control. Replaceability is not about diminishing others. It is about making a contribution difficult to erase. If scarcity is constructed, autonomy cultivated, and consequence designed, then power grows, which shifts dynamics. The illusion of neutrality vanishes. It calculates anyways. Stability, believed to be the reward for doing the right thing, disappeared during the financial crisis as major banks collapsed. Lehman Brothers disappeared, and thousands of employees who had followed every institutional rule were dismissed in weeks. It was not morality, it was utility that determined who stayed. The world responds to consequence. The study of behavioral data and negotiation experiments reveals that individuals with higher perceived power initiate offers, anchor aggressively, and capture more value. Belief follows, position follows, which alternatives followed. So much of what we call confidence is structural backing. The naive person equates social approval with safety. Longitudinal workplace studies show that it correlates more strongly with indispensability. Meta-analyses demonstrate that, while pleasant, agreeableness does not consistently predict higher income or authority. Without leverage, warmth becomes decoration. You can reject it, but performance evaluation, market forces, and dynamics will still assess your replaceability. Platform workers are rated continuously. Algorithms calculate. The worker may not compete, however the system measures anyways. Corporate structures are polite, however very similar. Reviews systems translate human contributions. Even when abandoned, it remained. Resources are finite. Someone's always defensible. Managers admit to headcount justification. They do not ask who is kind, but who makes revenue, holds clients, and has non-transferable knowledge. The language is clinical, however the results are not. The strategic person does not romanticize. They ensure they track their scarcity by understanding their exit. Those who are in the dark about this believe that being nice keeps them safe. Research show dominance establishes around utility and power instead of moral standard. If what is brought to the table does not improve the end result, then it will be of no use. How emotionally unsettling the discovery would be. It simplifies something important and reveals comfortable fallacies. Raising your worth is about choice. When something that can be offered, others think differently and speak in a way others understand. It alters the cost. The same thing reappears in relationships. Disrespect is tolerated from someone who relays on financial support and on external things in order to live. Studies show that there is always someone who gives to their partner in a relationship. Autonomy circulates differently. Again, love is the reason to the fact. Knowing that it takes all, it's just not hating or cynicism. It also to get clarity for incentives. Someone who can see the all that happens, doesn't just get up every morning and think of domination or how they will overpower. Those that are wise instead prefer to not get what something else offers mixed up with security. Since from birth, companies are meant to be how those that like each other, economic growth, things given to everyone, which makes systems, and they respond to take and give. It is also not given, it is made, it is earned. The decision may require never using the take and give relationship aggressively. Instead, prefer the choice to work together rather than overpower. What if someone does not have anything to use in the relationship? Then that said relationship must live through feelings that have not been heard, feelings that don't share what each other is going through. This is the last thing being put together. Worth translates the option, and the other thing translate the power. The ability is just to not show or use power. From here on out, the problem is not something big and fearful anymore. And more of you can be done with thinking big is power. You can refuse to be hateful, instead of making sure you're bad at doing it. One can't run away from getting viewed. In every system that is in place or that you follow will view the end result, either if said person would want it to happen or not. A simple person wants to be kept safe. Instead, a smart person is being prepared to be freed. Increase how expensive not having their worth to the table will be, more for the option than the overpower. Increase how important not being there is, or they will leave the destined up TP someone else. The difference is instead of choosing term.